Naked. You're looking very, very smart, if I may say so, which is
Thank you.
It's so good to see you here on the set, you know, and it's been so long. I'm really anxious to learn about some of the intricacies of your life story, which I'm not that familiar. I just know you're one real hell of a good human being and has your heart in the right place. And welcome very much to Conversations. Pleasure to welcome to the program a very good long-term acquaintance come friend of mine, and that being Jessica Flagg. She's a person who's known to many around New York City. I know she has run for the United States Congress, and she's involved now as a realtor and also as a headhunter in her current situation. She's always been, it seems to me, very vocally and articulately vocal on matters political in a progressive persuasion, as I can recall. And Jessica, it's so good to have you here, and welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you, Harold. It's wonderful to be here.
This is a chance for me to get the lowdown, because I don't know the background about you, and maybe you can share it as a way of wading into this conversation. Where you were born and raised and educated a little bit, and then we can get talking about things from that perspective, and then get talking about the many things. I know you back 15 years or so, but could you share your own background with the audience and myself, please?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
I grew up, well, I was born in New York City.
Okay.
And spent the first 15 years or so of my life in Babylon, New York, Long Island. Two brothers and mother and a father who are both passed on now, but they were really interesting people. My mother was a lifelong liberal Democrat. My father was a Republican. And I can remember early days sitting at the top of the stairs wondering if you know, our family was about to go through some dramatic change.
Oh, they actually talked about it.
They had incredible discussions. I mean, the scariest one to me was the one about whether Red China should be admitted to the United Nations.
Oh, I remember that used to be on everybody's lips. Yeah.
You know, I first of all didn't know what Red China was. I had no idea what the United Nations were. You know, but sat there and listened to both of these people passionately, articulately discussing their positions, which were very different. And, you know, that was a time that somebody would end up going out walking the dog. I suppose most of the time it was my father. Yeah. But anyway,
that's a way to get away from a, okay, is that a thing? Thank you. That's an excuse to get out of a bad situation or a
well, that was how they resolved they were obviously not going to solve the problems of the world on that particular evening. Neither of them was going to cave in on their positions, so somebody would go walk the dog. I have
a great remembrance from the famous Webb Pierce. Do you remember Webb Pierce?
No, I don't have any memory of this stuff. But we moved to England when I was 16.
Okay.
And I went to school, first at Box Hill School, which is a public school in Surrey.
Does that mean it's private?
Yeah, that's right.
They got it all mixed up in England.
It was a co-educational.
Now, how old are you now? When you're
I was
going
16.
Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, good. Yeah, right.
And so finished high school basically in England and started college.
We should make that clear to the audience. A public school in England is a real private school.
That's right.
And that's sort of like the prep school thing, Eton, Harrow, and all that kind of thing.
It turned out this particular school was somewhat of it was an experimental school. It was co-educational boarding school. And my parents, of course, didn't really understand the significance of that. There were some really interesting people there, daughters and sons of diplomats and royalty, who were really problem kids, basically. I mean, it was a pretty wild place. We had, and my brothers and I were like little lambs. We were I didn't know a four-letter word, other than maybe what I heard somebody utter in a moment of desperation.
They didn't come out in those arguments, the Republican, Democrat?
No, not at all. My parents are much more intellectual than that.
They were intellectuals. Were they in the diplomatic service or something?
No, my father was in advertising. He was a writer.
Okay.
And my mother was a registered nurse.
Oh, good. I have great respect for registered nurses.
She read 14 books a week. My mother was a reader.
Right.
And my father was a writer, so it was a pretty good combination.
Yeah, indeed. That really is true. And your brothers were younger, older?
Younger.
Younger. Okay. Yeah. But there was intellectual curiosity and excitement and talk and thought other than just mundane things about the washing machine and everything, like is a lot of far too many people, I think. And you were then in what would be like a prep school in England with some of the leading elements of the society would be your fellow classmates.
I wouldn't want to call it a prep school. It was a sort of school of last resort for a lot of these kids. I mean, it was an interesting group of people, and it was a good school, but it wasn't a prep school.
It wasn't a Borstal. Borstal is a term for what we used to call reform school.
No, because it was experimental. It was liberal-thinking people were there.
Yeah, well, it would be in a time when that,
Anyway, so I stayed in England and then came back to the United States for a brief period. I guess I lasted about a year and a half. I went to NYU and dropped out and went up to Canada.
Wait a minute. You were only a year and a half in England, so you're 17 and a half?
3 years.
So you're 19 or so when you come back to America and go into Columbia?
NYU.
NYU in what?
I was an undergraduate.
Undergrad, okay, yeah.
And I dropped out and went up to Canada and lived in Montreal for almost the next 10 years.
That's exciting. I mean,
love
that's
Montreal.
an exciting change of venues. What was causing you to do those kind of moves, if I may, other than just wanderlust or Nixon?
Nixon was president. I couldn't believe they were re-electing him. I thought, oh my God, this is really not good. And I didn't want to be any part of it. I really just wanted to be away.
About 73 we're talking, then he was re-elected.
It was 72.
72, right. He was.
So I went up to Canada, and I had some friends from England who had moved to Canada.
You were developing a well-attuned political sense?
I already had a well-attuned political.
Seems to me like you may have come down on your mother's
kind of
side.
Grew up with that. That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And but both parents were very strongly. I mean, I'd say I came out on my mother's side, except that my father was a staunch supporter of civil rights.
Yeah, right.
The whole family was very strongly in support of civil rights, and my mother marched with Dr. King, but my father was 100% supportive of that. He had
the march with King.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
he had an interesting background. I mean, when he was, I think, in first grade or something, so the story goes, he'd gotten thrown out of school because when he found out what we did to the American Indians, the Native American Indians.
It's a disgrace what we did to the
exactly.
American
So he
Indians.
had his own little moment of activism, although it was in first grade for him. But
good for him.
He never forgot it. And so these were the people I grew up with.
There used to be in the Republican Party, if I may, there used to be, I don't know, before Reagan or whatever, there used to be a considerable amount of, Vanderbilt and, what they call moderates or they came to call them Rockefeller Republicans. But it seems to have evaporated. It seems to be very ideologically drawn now. But we don't want to jump ahead. We got you in Montreal.
For about 10 years. And
10 years is a long time. What were you doing? Were you going to school?
I transitioned. I went from being a hippie. And,
you were a hippie. Okay, that says a lot.
Played my guitar in the street for money, and that was fun times. And then
72,
ended up selling computer systems with Computer Sciences Corporation.
Up in
Montreal?
In
Montreal, Canada. I was a technical sales rep for them.
Oh, good for you. Montreal is a wonderful town. It's very European, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you do French? You know French?
I speak a little French.
Okay.
But pretty rusty at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
But then I came back to the States in '81, felt that my family was, my grandparents, I guess, were aging, and it was sort of time to come back home and be a little closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came into the big city.
Back to New York.
For the first time.
Back home,
I'd never lived in New York, so it was living in New York City.
Well, you were in
the
New
first
York
time.
City vicinity, though. You were born and raised in Babylon.
Babylon is, but I wouldn't want to.
You don't count that part of New York?
Not the way we lived. We sailed, we swam, we fished, we played tennis. We had nothing to do with a city existence. I mean,
right. And even as a youngster, and when you were there, you were going to public schools and that sort of thing?
Sure.
Yeah, right.
To the West Babylon school system.
Okay. That's interesting, yeah.
And in New York, I guess I didn't count the time I went to NYU. I wasn't really. It's the
you
same,
didn't resonate to New York City.
No, it's not the same thing.
Gershwin.
I basically landed from having lived in England.
Yeah, England, yeah.
And didn't really know the ways of the world particularly well. I was quite naive coming back into New York City, and that first year or so at NYU was an experiment, I would say.
Okay.
And I came back here to live, and I had a job, and I got an apartment. I was part of the fabric of the.
Yeah. And then but after that, you went to Montreal for 10 years.
After my student days.
After your student days, and then you came back to New York after that.
Right.
So
and
you'd be coming back, and you've been here ever since.
Right.
Montreal's loss is New York's gain, I would say. And I think you've come home, so we're going to claim you as a hometown girl.
Oh, that's
okay?
right. Of course. Of course, this is home.
Yeah. And you came back, and got into the computer industry, and you transited over into a concern with the business world from your hippie days and so forth.
Yeah,
right?
I'd done a stint in Canada in well, it's a sort of long, convoluted story, but anyway, I did some executive search work up in Canada before I ended up selling computer systems with Computer Sciences Corporation.
Oh, you did? Well, that's interesting. That's foreshadowing, yeah.
Right, and then when I came here, I was selling computer systems here, and then went back into the executive search business, basically. And I was in the executive search business from 84 to 2003.
That's pretty long, yeah.
And I was a partner. I ended up being a partner
Who were you with
a firm called the Consulting Group.
Okay. That was a major headhunter group?
Yeah, we had offices in London, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Tokyo.
So that's a long stint. That's a real professional
It was a great
thing
experience.
Yeah.
And in that role, if you like, I'd started out doing executive search in the commercial real estate area, and I built a very successful practice in that. And when I switched over and went into the consulting group, they needed somebody to handle the financial services area. And somehow or other, I ended up almost specializing in economists. So I went for a while down to Washington almost every week and interviewed people at the IMF and the World Bank and the Federal Reserve constantly.
About what?
Interviewing them as prospective candidates. I was headhunting.
For headhunting positions within the financial world, yeah.
That's right.
Both political and private sector, or no, you didn't do any looking for candidates
I wasn't doing anything political at the time.
Inside the government, no.
Although it was interesting because...
a lot of revolving doors connect those people often. Yeah.
Well, my conclusion after interviewing a number of people at the IMF, I thought, whoa. Because as I began to understand how the IMF was working and what it was that they were doing and these policies that they were inflicting basically on some of the poorer Latin American countries, and I began to understand how it worked, I developed a political view on that. And I questioned, so then I started to question these economists with more of a political
bend.
More of a political, I'd say to them,
maybe,
don't you think this is pretty one-sided, and how can you say that this is the right way? And then I'd have to listen to them. They'd have to defend themselves and defend the policies. And it was kind of, and they laughed. Most of them would laugh. They weren't used to being challenged. So it was an interesting. And that was before, up until the stolen election of 2000.
Oh, yeah, wasn't that something else?
I was basically... I'd show up for women's rights and for,
civil rights,
non-nuclear proliferation. And, so I would be the protester in the street with a signpost, once or twice a year or however often. But, I was not particularly involved. I'd vote. But after 2000...
Could I ask you, did you study economics at all?
A little bit.
So when you were talking with and you're talking with people
I forgot to tell you about that. Yeah, I went to McGill University, but I didn't finish.
You went to McGill,
a bunch of courses.
McGill, and did you do some economics or political economy or anything?
I did that back here.
You did? At
NYU? McGill, it was
no?
mostly business management.
Business management.
Right.
But as far as
I took a lot of computer courses.
Oh, really? So you got grounded in computers and things. I was just asking because you're talking with people as a headhunter, and then you're starting to look at some of the policy implications of the underlying principles by which it works, structural adjustment, and all those kind of things. You would want to have had some. Okay, I'm just wondering. You were educating
yourself. After you interview enough people and you hear enough answers, you begin to think that you know something, which is a little dangerous. But it was very interesting.
Yeah, and you began to get you began to see some of the possibilities that some of these things weren't exactly the best thing for the folks. If I could make a leap of faith, you began to see that rather than just the bottom line, consideration. And you're a headhunter. You're looking for people within the financial industry or within the financial realm.
Yeah, one of those early assignments was for Goldman Sachs, and so I was very successful for them. I don't want to name names, but anyway, suffice it to say that I completed my assignment well, and the person who they hired is still there. But he is one of these people who I had that kind of political conversation with, if you like, and it was an interesting conversation. And we went back and forth about whether or not the policies of the IMF were in fact helpful to these economies, these struggling economies.
It's a big issue.
Right, it is.
It's a grounding issue for us all to consider.
Grateful that I had the experience and the exposure and the on-the-street education, if you like, that I got through those conversations that I had when I was doing those interviews. And I always treated them as conversations. I would ask people the open-ended question.
Right, right. A conversation is different than an interview. It's more spontaneous,
I had
more
to get certain
open-ended,
information,
yeah.
But I wanted to hear how they would address an open-ended question. I wanted them to explain policies and positions.
Let me ask you, if I could, in a certain way, and this is a little bit off the track maybe, but headhunting, that's important. You're looking for people who have skills, understanding, capabilities that are important to, in a certain sense, a leadership position within a certain realm, that they know, they have their education, their background, their understanding. That's a very important function in terms of how we decide our leadership. There's various realms of that. You could go up already, you're going to be looking for, let's just say, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board or something at a very high level. And then there's other people who would be taking care of the very important work that's done by the bureaucracy itself, like accounting department within that or something. Were you at all levels of concern within the financial world that you were headhunting for, or how was it determined?
I was mostly looking for chief economists.
Chief economists,
right.
Okay.
People who were going to be heading up departments.
What
or
role
perhaps they were the chief economist for a particular, in one particular case with the conversations that I was talking about for the IMF, it was the chief economist for the Latin American coverage.
Okay.
And I'd done one for chief economist for the Americas, which included Latin America and U.S. I'd done one for chief economist covering everything.
And you had quite a few years at that.
Yeah, I did that for a long time.
Could you tell me what is the role of the chief economist for some of these International Monetary Fund, World Bank? What is the role?
Well, I didn't
or let's say,
do the assignment for the International Monetary Fund.
No.
I'm not
but
going to be able to answer that question.
What role does the chief economist play within our major financial institutions, both private and public sector? Institutions that exist to have some steersmanship over this financial world in which we're also dependent and so forth.
Right. It depends on the institution. I mean, the problem.
Yeah. We're in a
which
problem
we are
now. We're in a
which
huge.
we are now living.
We're now going through a great
is
problem.
That the role of the chief economist was often undermined, and instead of being really the chief risk, the economists are supposed to be able to evaluate where the risk is, understand what the trends are, and give the organization an overall macro view, so that that they're on the right side of the trade, if you like. But too often, I think what happened was that the house, the financial institution that they were going to be working for, wanted them to really come up with rosy scenarios about this, that, or the other so that they could sell.
Would they want that economist to come up with reports that are going to help them follow their business plan?
Exactly.
If you're talking with the private sector entity.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the
they would want them to be malleable to the mission statement of the entity of which they're going to become a part.
So the few times that that I had the privilege of working on an assignment where they were going to give the economist absolute free rein.
Free rein, okay.
In terms of what they were going to be allowed to produce in terms of research, I would say in those cases we had tremendous success.
Really? Okay, good. By the we, you mean the company that you were working with?
When I say we, I'm talking about the person who I put into the job, the hiring client. Successes for everybody who participates in it. Right?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, that's very good.
It's a more holistic view
I understand.
of how the world works. It's I've always felt a responsibility when I'm doing an assignment for the people that I've been interviewing. I felt a responsibility toward them. Are they going to be feeling good in the role that they're about to go into?
Very good. That's a very important position that you're...
That was one of the things that perhaps differentiated...
Would it make a big difference, if I may? It's really interesting. I'm also thinking that idea of headhunting is something that, in a certain sense, I'm just thinking personally now, because I'm looking always for people who are relevant to understanding the human... It's an educational thing, in a way. You're looking for people you're looking for professors at a university, there is a vetting thing you go through. Or any person in a position of intellectual concern. The headhunting role is a very important one, and that you're doing that. It's very interesting. Very interesting to me. Well, do you find that a company, let's say company A, investment bank A, did you work for investment banks and brokerage houses and that?
Yeah.
And forgive my not understanding the situation well, but one would have a certain philosophy. The other one, let's say one's more venture or more entrepreneurial or more something, and the other one's municipal bonds, or they're more conservative or something. They vary. So the economist would want to be able to feel comfortable in the environment that you're going to do. A chief economist, as you say, would want to be in a place where he is going to feel comfortable in terms of his own philosophy, both economic theory and political philosophy.
We call that corporate culture.
Okay.
And I would say that my experience with all of this is that corporate culture plays about a 9/10 weight in terms of whether something's going to work or not.
Okay.
So.
And you want those to blend, if possible, between
100%. Otherwise, it's not a deal. It's as simple as that. I mean, the culture either works or it doesn't work.
Yeah, you don't want to put somebody in who's going to be an irritant to the company.
You don't.
Okay, that's a very interesting, nuanced role that you're playing.
Unfortunately, sometimes I became very unhappy doing executive search work.
You did?
Well, progressively after the the Enron thing just opened up such ugliness, and how companies, and even before that, actually, we started seeing problems earlier than that with the financial sector and how they were being managed and run, and how they were. My experience became tainted by a few companies who would present business plans and hire me to help them put these business plans into play.
Kenny Lay.
I would go and find the people, they would be hired, and 6 months later, oops, we've changed our mind. And I thought that was very unfair to the people who were put into those jobs. So I became an expert basically at negotiating people's employment contracts and how to protect themselves going in. And not something particularly well known on my client side, but on the hiring entities, company side.
Right.
But I would always advise people who were going into jobs, I'd whisper in their ears about how they wanted to negotiate their employment letter, and helped some people significantly with that. It protected them. And it was important that I did that, because I felt. And then
you have to have. You would have to.
The 2000 election kind of changed everything for me, because.
Yeah, it did a lot of us. Yeah.
I felt as though, increasingly, with the unveiling of, following on the heels of the 2000 debacle, maybe we should call it, instead of an election.
I would say.
Where I felt as though I'd been punched in the solar plexus. I couldn't believe that we hadn't counted the vote in Florida, and I couldn't believe that the Supreme Court appointed a president, and I couldn't believe that the country just accepted that. And shortly after that,
you think Al Gore gave in too easily or something, or was there any other thing we could have done?
Well, the Democratic Party in those days didn't really back Al Gore. They weren't committed to him. The Democratic Party is another problem altogether. But
we can get to that, because you did run for Congress.
We will get to that.
Yeah.
If we have time. Yeah. It's my life story.
Well, your life is too damned interesting, if I may say so.
I'm having a good time.
Good.
It's important to reflect on the reasons for doing things and how everything ties back. And today I would say to you, I've gone into the real estate industry. I'm selling real estate with Coldwell Banker.
Yeah.
And my goals there are simply to try to help people maximize what's the most important investment in their lives.
Absolutely.
Their home.
We've got a big problem in the realm of real estate. Huge.
In New York, shame on New York, this is about the only state in the country where there's no real functioning MLS. New York City is
MLS?
Multiple listing service. In every other part of the
service. I don't know what that is. That's
country, when people want to sell their property and they list it with a realtor, they can be assured that everybody in the world is going to know about this property. New York has been steadfastly following different rules and fighting against this. So we have.
What's the philosophy?
What's
the philosophy for it and against it?
We have the concept, if you like, of the private market, and so where people will have listings that are protected. They're not really listed. They're kind of privately on the market, and you can understand on one hand why people would want to do that, but on the other hand, that's not a free market. It's not a free market access, and it therefore creates problems in the market because
why would somebody have one like that? I mean, what would be the reason that they would?
Lots of reasons.
Not redline. They want to redline certain people, not have certain people be able to bid for it, or what?
That could. Although the co-op boards kind of take care of that aspect. The real issue, I think, comes down to sellers possibly wanting to be below the radar. They don't want people to know that they're on the market. I mean, there's a certain population that will always want their privacy, and I think that in that case there's a reason for the market to think that there's a role for it to play. Unfortunately, it works against the average person, and because of the way that the New York real estate market has evolved, I guess we're starting to come out of it. But you would have situations where people's properties would only be being shown to about half of the potential buyers because the other half wouldn't have access to it. That's changing a bit, but the company I'm with, Coldwell Banker, is the founder of the MLS system across the United States. They were one of the very early companies that believed in that.
Yeah, okay.
Very wonderful company with great principles and terrific marketing. And I felt after talking to the various different companies here in New York that they really lined up with who I am as a person.
Okay, that's important for you to get your own bearings straight, right?
Oh, yeah, because
and you've been upset by the election, and you apparently had become you hadn't actually come down on the side of calling yourself a neocon or anything in terms of the broader political way of seeing the world. You had become more in tune with what might be called the progressive side, or advancing justice among all the folks. In terms of your political orientation.
Yes.
Because I know politically you got into the thing, you were involved with Mr. Kucinich, who's noted for taking that kind of a position.
I became the New York State coordinator for Dennis Kucinich. That was really by accident in 2003 and 2004.
You probably wouldn't have become his representative if you were a full-fledged supporter of Rush Limbaugh and Ronald Reagan.
Oh, no, but I would never have been a supporter of theirs, so that would not
Well, that's what I'm saying. You had come down on that side of things, and thank God you had, and congratulations on all. That's where you and I ran into each other. It's one of the crossroads in there because that's the way I remember you.
Well, I think that we met each other in the pro-democracy movement, which was in 2000. In that time frame, I got very involved with...
Remember Maurice Paprin?
Yeah,
well... Would be calling all those meetings we would have and so forth?
I met him in...
He was a wonderful fellow.
That was the work that I was doing with ECAR, Economists Allied for Arms Reduction.
Yes, I do, yeah. A good organization.
From my days of headhunting, I decided to take my knowledge of economists, and I found... I can't remember how. I guess through Business Leaders for Sensible Priorities, which is
good.
It's
another Benz. Yeah.
I found Economists Allied for Arms Reduction, which is now known as EPS, Economists for Peace and Security.
Okay.
And I undertook being the director for something called the Business Council, and our goal was to engage economists from the financial sector, and I knew plenty of them.
Yeah. You must have quite a Rolodex that you kept.
I did have.
You still have it all on file?
My computer crashed. It was a terrible loss.
We'll get a 10-year-old to straighten that out.
I paid thousands of dollars, and it doesn't get straightened out. I get fried. Its brains got fried. But anyway, and all the backups that I thought were working weren't working.
No, sorry, really.
No,
Rolodex is what's the most valuable thing you've got.
I lost it all.
No,
so,
that's terrible.
When you start over, apparently you start over. I mean, I've had a few experiences in life where I'm starting over, and for me, apparently when starting over happens, it's called starting over. So
Here we go again up Mount Sisyphus.
Starting over. So it's fine. I mean, it's terrific in a way. It's wipe the slate, and if I don't do it personally, the ether does it for me in the form of my hard drive. But anyway, experience with the pro-democracy movement and then working for peace. And I got involved with the Economists Allied for Arms Reduction, which was very interesting work because I got to engage the financial sector in conversations about war and peace and sustainability.
Wonderful.
And
yeah.
I really had some, I mean, I have to say that there was some participation from the chief economist at Goldman Sachs, and I'm not comfortable mentioning his name because he's now in a very prominent role. And but he was one of my panelists, as was the chief economist from Lehman Brothers, as was the chief economist from Prudential Securities, and former chief economist from Chemical Bank.
Let me ask, the chief economist, you keep saying that you were dealing with people at that level a great deal. The
right.
chief economist at these investment houses, do they have a really significant role at these institutions in terms of what those institutions are about? Are they on the board? Are they, what is their relationship to the CEO? What is their relationship to the power structure? Because some economists become just academics who don't have any real function, but do they have a real function in terms of the financial industry?
Yeah, they do.
Because it's relevant now to what we're going through now. Financial people who understand the financial situation. We get Mr. Paulson, we get Mr. Bernanke, we get the people who are running our national economy through this thing we're going through now. So that question of people who have understanding of economics in a systems way are really important people in terms of where we are now, don't you think?
Right, and it was good to know that there were some people in those roles, in those kinds of companies, who are willing to be visible on the discussion of peace versus war, economics, the impact of and
environment, maybe. Is that an issue that
well,
emerged?
we didn't do one on the environment. We did one on the U.S. budget. We did one on money laundering. We did one on. I'm talking about panelists and discussions and conversations.
And these are panelists and discussions for where? Where do these panelists do these things? Various.
I organized 4 of them. Four different forums.
Right.
And we held them either in conference rooms of companies. I think TIAA, CREF, and Lehman Brothers hosted, and Solomon Smith Barney, I think, hosted ones for us. So we had, I think, 2 of them at TIAA CREF and one at Lehman Brothers and one at Solomon Smith Barney.
Did you videotape the proceedings, and did you make them available? Did you audio tape them? Did you make a record of it? Did you make any printouts? Did you?
No, what a shame.
It's an educational thing, you know?
Yeah, well, we didn't. We didn't.
Okay, you didn't.
So this was, had I had access to the people who I now know, but of course in those days I didn't know you. Mm-hmm. I only got to meet the people who were involved in this movement toward greater education and promotion of this kind of thought.
Well, the kind of thought being, if I may, the kind of thought being things that would be leading to peace and arms reduction, and those kind of issues were those that motivated you in terms of your goals and that kind of thing.
Right.
So you were looking in a headhunting way for people who could help you advance those among people who were important decision makers within the financial world.
I undertook
That's
my
a
own
very
little,
important job.
I undertook my own little program.
Right.
I mean, I became more concerned with what was happening in the wider world as a result of the 2000 debacle.
That one really woke you up.
I really understood that what was about to happen to the wider world was nothing short of a disaster because of what had happened in our country.
Oh, did you see that? When I say 2000, I'm thinking of the election and the selection.
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Could you foresee, and I also heard you talk about Kenneth Lay and Enron, which was sort of, he finally did get convicted and so forth, but that was a malappropriation, but it was within, and they were a darling of the financial world for a long time when they were doing so very well. You'll remember everybody was singing their praises and everything. But there were consequences to the system itself. Were you weren't ever with people who were able to project, let's say the year 2000, it's a convenient time, beginning of a millennium and so forth, the kind of financial thing that has hit this system upside the head, like a mule in Missouri?
Well, the warning came in 1998. I mean, really.
What warning are you talking about, please?
Well, we had a devaluation of currencies. We had the long-term capital corporation crash.
Okay.
1998 should have been okay, not all the stops are working, not all the, things are a little more vulnerable than they should be.
Really?
To
okay.
financial shock.
And you were talking to people who were very much chief economists at major houses who were aware of the implications of the system itself, the whole financial system.
We didn't necessarily have conversations about this at the time.
Okay.
I don't want to say that we were talking about it at the time. But I'm just saying the wake-up call was there. It was apparent.
Okay.
And I think...
From long-term capital, you think?
Yes, and I think that
and you had that drop, 87, we had a drop, 502 points. Remember that one day? 22% of the market value? That scared the bejesus out of me. Did it you, or were you involved with that?
And from that, what they put in were stops on program trading. I mean, they hadn't really acknowledged that there were underlying vulnerabilities and weaknesses. They only addressed a portion of it, just like, okay, we'll just stop program trading. We're not going to allow drops bigger than whatever. We're going to shut down the market. So that was 87.
Yeah, that was 87 was the really, October, if I remember.
They never addressed, in fact, they only weakened the regulatory agencies, if you like.
Yeah, we had
the regulatory environment, in fact, became weaker and weaker and weaker. And we're now living with the consequences of it.
Okay.
And,
You've been in touch with people who've really been feeling the pulse of things. I've
been in touch with these people. I haven't necessarily had these conversations with them all. It's just that it seems to me to be evident.
But this is informing your consciousness all along. You're keeping track of these things.
I read Krugman, and I...
Yeah, you like Krugman, right?
I think he's...
Of the economists and people who write publicly about things, he's about as good as you can find.
And I think if you wanted to go to a website and be very well informed,
please,
you would go to the Economists for Peace and Security website, EPS, www.eps.org.
EPS.org.
Right.
Okay, thank you. EPS.org.
Stands for Economists for Peace and Security.
Okay, good.
I mean, these are people who are, they have, I don't know,
who would be
9 or 10 Nobel laureates on their board.
Stiglitz
Stiglitz is on there.
Krugman, or no? Or no?
Krugman can't because of his role at the Times.
Yeah, okay.
I think he's been a guest
Well, these are
speaker.
people who could be informing our political class.
I wish they were. Robert Reich was a member of
Romer,
EPS.
or no?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the list lately.
Yeah, but you've got major economic
Alan Sinai, who was a prominent Wall Street economist, is part of it. I'm trying to think. There's Susan Yellen, I think, from the Federal Reserve. Is on the board. They just have numerous economists who are people of significant
particularly if you have a certain I don't want to
stature.
A certain stature, but with a particular view of the human condition that would be roughly called, let's say, smart, or I would say progressive, or democratic, or appropriate to something other than a reification of an outdated system that has to be replaced, and maybe progressive looking in a visionary sense, or where we might go for someone who would be giving vision to something other than what's being reified out of history. Visionary or no? If you understand what I'm saying. Because that's what we're looking for.
I think that within the community of the EPS, and Jamie Galbraith is another one I should...
He's at Austin,
Well, he's a member of this.
And they've got the Levi Institute up at Bard.
Yeah, and these are people who are thoughtful, analytical. They write, and they reason. They are... David Gold, by the way, is another one. He's at the New School,
I don't know. Okay. Teresa Geller-Raducci. Do you know Teresa Geller-Raducci?
They take things like the true cost of missile defense, for example. They did a big expose. That was one of the forums that I put on for them, for the Business Council. They don't necessarily all agree amongst themselves about everything, but these are people who don't just think that the status quo, the military-industrial complex, is the right way to be spending our economic resources. In fact, there's right now, with all the money that we're needing to boost the economy.
Staggering. Just staggering. $1 trillion.
We could take easily $80 billion out of the Pentagon. They wouldn't even know it was gone. They lose trillions, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So, you take $80 billion or so and use it to prop up the states. I mean, I can't believe
the states are all in trouble
stimulus
now.
package that the Republicans managed
you
to
put me in touch after a very good and stern and appropriate lecture to me on the telephone that I should read Mr. Krugman's article a couple nights ago, and I went to it, and it was very enlightening. I thank you for that lecture and getting me to read that carefully. Yeah.
We need to support the people who are on the right side of the discussion.
Okay, side of the discussion.
When I say the right side of the discussion, I mean the who are on the side, if you like, of
progress?
The little guy.
Of the little guy, okay.
What do you need in this environment? We don't really need to prop up the elites. The elites,
they usually do pretty well by themselves.
They've got their nest egg and their cushion. They're going to be all right. But when you start cutting jobs of teachers and of firemen and the police and the sanitation workers and the transit workers, those people don't have the same cushion. They're not even close.
No, I know.
And besides, the people who depend on the services and the healthcare people, the elder care community and the, you start cutting the social safety net budget.
Yeah. Well, they've been doing that since Mr. Reagan.
It's the budget that really needs not to be cut.
Well, they've been cutting that since Mr. Reagan.
Well, I understand that, but that's the wrong place to cut.
I would agree with you.
That's where, in fact, you really need to spend more. If you spend more in those areas, you can employ a greater number of people. All that money goes straight back into the economy, and you get the multiplier effect because these people are basically not making enough money to really save. They're making enough money to pay their bills.
Right. Yeah.
So the money goes straight back into the economy.
Yeah, they'll spend it right away.
It doesn't do us any good to have money that gets put into savings, because although that's a nice thing for the economy to be able to generate jobs that pay people well enough so that we can in fact save, but right now we just need to keep people from starving and keep people from being homeless.
Yeah, it's down to that now, and a lot of those things do happen to be in what is called the public sector.
Of course.
And
this is where the money needs to be spent.
Right.
Or a certain portion of it.
And we have a group within the private sector who thinks the public sector is just, Mr. Reagan used to say the government is the problem. And we have had this argument.
George Bush, the government was the problem.
Yes.
I mean, he lived to prove it right.
Well put, yes.
He made the government a problem. That was his life's ambition.
No, but you understand, that's their philosophy. They're market fundamentalists. And Mr. Friedman, I would submit, who's been in the saddle theoretically and that kind of thing.
They wanted to prove that government was the problem, and boy, oh boy, they made it right.
And they've also got a great...
by the virtue of, taking away the civil liberties, by ignoring the Geneva Conventions, by putting, unqualified people into jobs like the FEMA job. I mean, they made government a big problem.
Oh, it was a terrible
thing. And then they cut all of the regulatory agencies to bone. So now that the FDA can't even do its job to make sure our food chain is safe, which is another huge problem that we have in this country, and that's been a problem for a long time. I mean, we've got people in this country who are being poisoned because of the food that they're eating. Right. Because they allow things like aspartame in the food chain. That does not belong in the food chain.
Right.
We've had an 8-fold increase in brain cancer and breast cancer since aspartame's been in the food chain. Yeah. People must not eat that.
Right. Okay.
But they're not well educated about it.
And you came into some cognition of Mr. Kucinich and so forth. I think Mr. Kucinich, I see Mr. Leahy, Senator Leahy, in the Senate is now going to bring forth a committee to investigate the activities of the Bush administration. They're going to investigate. Mr. Kucinich is trying, and they're all pelting Mr. Who's the guy, the head of the Judiciary Department in the House from Detroit?
Conyers.
For impeachment. Right. They'd lead us into a war on that kind of thing, and the sins that have cost tremendous amounts of lives and treasure and everything like that. And it seems to be...
I think they should be tried for treason. I believe.
Yeah, they should. They're probably not going to be. Mr. Leahy's he's going to investigate it, sort of like Frank Church did back in the 70s when they were investigating COINTELPRO and that kind of stuff. There will be that, but the system will go on, I guess. But at least I understand exactly what you're saying, yeah.
I think that the point is that if we don't enforce accountability, I mean, if these crimes are ignored, then there's no reason for any administration in the future not to repeat these same atrocities, and they are atrocities.
As power structures have throughout a good deal of human history.
So I think that the people of this country really need the accountability to be addressed.
I'm glad, Mr.
And I believe that it should be addressed also in the corporate boardrooms. I think what's going on in the corporations, again, these are entities where shareholders
you might laughable.
Well, people are participating in what they think. I mean, what made this country such a powerhouse and so successful was that we were a nation of laws, and that we all supposed, there was accountability, there was openness in terms of, we thought, how the accounting systems were working.
Yeah.
The fact that people were gaming the system and lying and cooking the books, I mean, that stuff you go to jail for that. Quickly to jail.
Well, a lot of things were done that were not just in any moral or any ethical sense in that, but they were done like vast tracks to the railroads and things, and built within an entrepreneurial context and that kind of stuff. That's part of it, the whole system, but they weren't outright. But then we have a progressive movement, and then we get a great inequality that develops. So then Teddy Roosevelt comes and brings a progressive movement to do some sort of but we're now up against it where we're going to have a massive alteration, perhaps, in the whole operation of our system as a result of this unprecedented thing that we've been hit with now, don't you think? And from your experience, are you reading what's going on with, the Congress and Mr. Obama and the financial stimulus package and all that with better understanding of the overall ramifications that you might pass on to our viewers and so forth? And what do you think is going to come out of it? This moment.
Well, the reality is, I don't think we're seeing. I don't think the Democrats are wielding their power very well. I think that they're back on their heels once again, which drives me crazy, frankly, because we won the election.
We did win that election. I think
you'd never know it by how this stimulus package is being negotiated. And
well, he needed those 3 votes to get the censure thing. To get 3 Republicans. He only got 3 Republicans over in the Senate on his side, and he needed those 3. They brought Mr. Kennedy in, I think, from heavy-duty treatment in order to cast the right vote. So it wasn't exactly bipartisan. The House was totally Democratic, not a single Republican. It doesn't look very bipartisan to me.
No. And the point is, though, that I think that the problem is that the Democrats have been a little bit naive about this bipartisan thought.
It's an admirable thing to think that we can all get together in the end and sing a song. And
when Rush Limbaugh stood up and said that he wants to see Obama fail, and then whenever I think there was 1 or 2 Republicans who spoke against him, and they got immediately castigated by the Republicans.
So he's like the lead. The party's being led by Rush Limbaugh.
The Republicans have clearly lined up there. And the only way, really, that the Democrats, it was a failure of leadership in a way. I think that they were caught unprepared for the fact that the Republicans were going to take the positions that they took. I think the Democrats, again, were a little bit naive about thinking, okay, everybody's going to pull on the oars together. Well, no, these guys are rowing that way. And so what needs to happen now, I think Obama has figured this out, is that there has to be a tremendous involvement from the top in terms of the leadership and the selling and the communication of what needs to happen. I think
from the top, or from
are
you? I thought you might have said
from Obama.
From Obama, and he has to be a little stronger, a little more forceful, and know who won the election.
He has to sell the programs.
Has to sell. Well, he's trying.
He can't get the Democrats underneath him are with a few exceptions, not doing a good job of selling for him. So he doesn't have the leadership in the in the rank and file, if you like, in Congress and in the Senate, apparently, to stand up and really make this happen for him. He's going to have to come from here and deliver the message.
Well, he's trying to be, it's admirable to try and be, we'll all sit down and reason together.
Yeah, well, I think that they found out that
two to tango.
It's not going to work.
You think? Do we give up on that? Or maybe we have a responsibility, if we're on the side of the right change and everything, to present something that let's say they, in this case you would say the Republican Party, or the world establishment for the conservative reification of institutions out of history and thoughts and so forth, outdated thinking perhaps from our progressive perspective. But we have to be able to present something that will be able to be, at a certain level, understood by them and gone along with them on their own terms.
Right. Well, what's
beyond the dialectic might be a possibility.
What's very easy to understand and yet somehow didn't get sold are the states' budgets, states' aid.
Oh, not only states, local
how could they
entities.
Not sell that? I don't understand how you could have a stimulus package that has $80 billion cut out from the original plan that gives aid to states. Because
particularly when they're in such need,
every
all
state
across
in
the country.
Union, and there are Democrats and Republican governors in there as well. And I think that this package has to be sold at that level, at the more local level, because every elected official, all the representatives, all the senators, are going to have to deal with the fact that their state that they're representing they have to be reminded, perhaps, that they're losing how many jobs. I think one of the very effective things was
598,000 jobs last month.
It's every job in Maine.
It's crazy.
Well, for sure, the Maine Congress, the Maine senators were going to vote with the bill.
Well, Olympia Snow and
you have to understand that this becomes more local.
Yeah.
And so the
How
Democrats
about it being
have
local
to
down to the people? Maybe there could be a mass movement that would.
Well, we're trying. I mean, all I can say is that I know.
Are you encouraged? Let me say, the problem is we don't have nearly enough time to go into all the nuance of what your story is about. Which your life story is very exciting and interesting and romantic even in a certain sense. But the thing is, we're coming down to the end. And what are you optimistic that we're going to be able to make these changes, or? What? We've only got a couple of minutes left. What's your overall sense? We're talking some of the details, but
I think that.
And are you happy about the possibilities that this Obama win of the election and the Obama mania that seems to be sweeping the world, which opens up perhaps an opportunity, might be able to have it so that we can get things right from a mass-based understanding of a thing that's going to be able to include everybody in a way that we haven't been able to arrive out of history? Can you be optimistic for the human prospect in the time immediately and a little bit further out?
How many minutes do we have?
We've only got about 4 minutes left.
So my sense is that there are a number of really important things happening that are I think that the Obama election is an example of the fact that the human spirit is probably alive and well.
Yeah.
And not going down.
Okay.
And I do believe that people around the world are recognizing each other. And what I mean to say that is, there is a tremendous recognition in the spiritual level that we have a greater identity than sitting in this room.
Yeah.
We are connected. And
yes, we are. We're all connected.
And what we do really does affect other people, and it really does matter. And I think that there are a lot of people. I've met some terrific entrepreneurs who are committed to sustainability, and they've come up with new products and new approaches to building businesses that are healthy businesses. I think that those people, I believe, are the great entrepreneurs of the next age. And I think that the time, we've turned a corner. I think our greatest hope for peace in the world, I mean, I really think that we have to get rid of the weapons. You know, the weapons
Absolutely.
business doesn't belong in the for-profit sector. Yeah. You know, how you get rid of that, I'm not quite sure, other than
Big
just
issue.
Make no market for it.
Big issue. Big issue. They're species lethal now, dear.
Well,
I'm almost sure the modeling would show they're species lethal. Existential new reality against which you could posit an almost liberating possibility on the positive side that is equally existentially significant, to make this some part of a time that we might be able to, as James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. We may be actually awakening to a moment of the end of the nightmare at the end of a qualitative transformation on the liberating side out of an unjust history to one that's going to really involve the human society and all the ecology within a whole new order. Do you have anything like that?
We have a long way. We have a long way to go.
And not a heck of a lot of time to go there, because
I do see
those weapon systems are very dangerous.
I do see a movement and an awareness and a willingness to work on this other level.
I hope so.
Across a lot of people.
Do you see the vision? Do you see where is it being enunciated? Is Mr. Obama enunciating a specific? Are the intellectuals coming up with other modeling that makes possible something that's not been possible
in
out
a lot
of history?
Of different places?
Okay.
You know, I recently read Eckhart Tolle's new book.
I don't know.
Called The New Earth, which is a wonderful book. Again, for awakening and enlightenment. You know, I've been practicing a spiritual technique since 1983, where, you know, it's meant to strengthen that spiritual understanding, that inner self, the connection to the greater world, if you like, the greater divine. You want to Sukyo Mahikari is the name of that.
Okay, I'm not familiar. Okay, yeah.
SUKYOMAHIKARI.
Okay.
I think that more and more people are doing yoga and meditating.
Yeah.
I think these are all indicators that we are awakening.
Okay, let's hope.
And when you do, you can't go back to the way you were.
No.
Once you've experienced the greater good, the greater connection, you can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, the quest for that kind of thing is what human society and the whole evolution of consciousness might be about, and it's privileged to live at a time of such qualitative transformation in the potentiality inherent in the situation. This is the most amazing time to be a live participant and conscious, I can imagine, and I think it's been added greatly by the presence of our guest, Jessica Flagg. And thank you, Jessica.
We hardly even touched on it.
We hardly got started. You know, you're just worried about we're going to run out of things to say. And she is, as you can see, a really a sterling citizen here of Spaceship Earth. I think it's the most challenging time, but I think it's the intellectuals are not presenting for the consideration of our political or even economic consideration a large scene, comprehensively seen alteration in the whole evolution of events in this part of the universe. And I think it's the intellectuals falling down on the job. We ought to do headhunting for our intellectuals that can provide an alternative. That's my own thought.
They're coming out. Check out the Eckhart
They're coming out of the woodwork, are they?
They're coming out. They are.
Okay, well, I think they're going to appear. A lot of those might appear on public access, and we've had one here who's helped with that. And thanks a lot for coming in. So good to see you, Jessica, as always.
Thank you, Howard.